Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning into News 9 Live. I'm Kabir Naqvi and you're watching this broadcast of top stories from our studios here in the National Capital Region, styled exclusively by Paul Mall. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an expansive list of stories for you to cover. We will touch upon the big global climate stories. We will talk about the top international developments, but first and foremost, what's happening back at home. Let's take a look at the domestic developments. Taking you right across to Uttarakhand at the top of the news hour. Close to 40 workers are feared to be trapped after an under-construction tunnel collapsed in Uttarakhand yesterday. The unfortunate incident happened in the Uttarkashi district. Inside the tunnel, which is meant to connect Silk Yatra to Dandalgaon. Now the tunnel is being built under the Char Dham road project, and the incident occurred at around 4 a.m. yesterday in the morning when a 150-meter long portion of the 4.5-kilometer long tunnel simply collapsed. The slabs from the ceilings just fell down. Relief and rescue operations are being conducted. They're still underway by the State Disaster Relief Force and the local state police. As per authorities, a narrow opening has been made to insert an oxygen pipe in the tunnel to provide immediate relief to the people that are stuck inside. Of course, all the people that were working inside this particular tunnel have with them oxygen cylinders, but is that going to be enough? And fearing that special hole was made through which an oxygen pipe was then put in. Now, relief teams said that nearly 200 meters of the slab will have to be cleared to open the tunnel and to pull out those stuck inside. Till now, no casualty has been reported in the incident. What you're taking a look at is the National Disaster Relief Force that has also made its way to the tunnel where the relief operations are happening. You can see the lit orange right behind this big earth mover over there. Now let's take a look at the Uttarkashi tunnel to gain more insight into this unfortunate incident. The under construction Uttarkashi tunnel is an engineering marvel located on the Char Dham route. It's one of India's most ambitious highway projects constructed by the NHIDCL. Now it's a bi-directional 2-lane 4.5-kilometer long tunnel which will reduce the distance between Yamunotri and Uttarkashi by about 26 kilometers. Meanwhile, the tunnel construction faces challenges given its terrain, topography, accessibility, climate, geology and hydrogeology. 90% of the tunnel is being excavated in phyllite, which is a very weak rock.
मेरी लगातार जब से घटना की जानकारी मिली है तब से मैं लगातार सभी के संपर्क में हूं। वहां के जिले के प्रशासन के लोगों से, कमिश्नरी के लोग, हमारे आपदा प्रबंधन के लोग, सारे लोग आपदा के काम में लगे हैं, रेस्क्यू के काम में लगे हैं, बचाव के काम में लगे हैं और एनडीआरएफ, एसडीआरएफ सभी मौके पर पहुंच गए हैं और भगवान से प्रार्थना करते हैं हम कि जल्दी सभी सकुशल जो है वापस आए।
देखिए, जो लेटेस्ट अपडेट ये है कि अभी यहाँ पे पुलिस फोर्स और एनडीआरएफ, एसडीआरएफ पहुँच चुके हैं मौके पर। जो अभी मेरी बात हुई है यहाँ पे जो जिम्मेदार अधिकारी हैं एनएचआईडीसीएल के, तो उनके द्वारा ये बताया गया है कि टोटल 36 जो है उनके रिकॉर्ड के हिसाब से जो है अंदर अभी ट्रैप्ड हैं और ये सूचना जो है तड़के जल्दी की बताई जा रही है 6-7 बजे के लगभग की। और ये जो आप देख रहे हैं ये स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट है टनल का, इससे लगभग 200 मीटर आगे की घटना है जिसमें 50 मीटर का जो प्रोजेक्शन है टनल का ऊपर से वो धंस गया है। तो अभी जो है हम जो भी इक्विपमेंट्स है, मशीनरी है, वो सब यहाँ पे रोप इन कर लिया गया है और जो रेस्क्यू है वो युद्ध स्तर पे चल रहा है और इसको जल्दी खत्म कर लिया जाएगा और सबको सेफली निकाल लिया जाएगा। जो एक ऑक्सीजन पाइप जो है अंदर पहुँचा दिया गया है और ऑलरेडी ऑक्सीजन अंदर है, तो मोस्ट प्रोबेबली जो है वो सेफ होंगे। अभी कोई जनहानि या कैजुअलिटी कोई सूचना नहीं है।
While maintaining our focus on the state of Uttarakhand, the Pushkar Singh Dhami-led government in the state of Uttarakhand is all set to hold a special session of the State Assembly after Diwali. As per sources, the special session will be called to pass the Uniform Civil Code. and hence paving way for its implementation in the state. Once the bill is passed and implemented, Uttarakhand will become the first state to adopt a uniform civil code post-independence. A 5-judge panel headed by retired Supreme Court Judge Justice Ranjana Desai has completed the draft report for the UCC implementation in the state. The report is now expected to be handed over to the state government in the next few days. Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami said that once the report is handed over, the process to implement UCC in the state will begin. Now, the Congress-led opposition has criticized the proposed move to hold a special session. It says it wants to see the draft report first and also asked for time in order to make suggestions. And just a day after Diwali, a thick layer of smog has engulfed Delhi and its adjoining national capital region. This after bursting of crackers for Diwali as well. A thick haze was seen covering the roads that reduced visibility and made it difficult to see beyond a few hundred meters. The air quality index at several places in the Delhi National Capital Region was in the severe or severe plus category for the past several days. However, following an intermittent rainfall on Friday, the average AQI did slip into the poor category. Delhi was, well, breathing again. Meanwhile, air quality index in various parts of Chennai has deteriorated to the poor category according to the Central Pollution Control Board. Now, while in Mumbai, certain parts of the city was engulfed in smog, post-Diwali cracker bursting in certain areas hasn't really helped the cause as well. Next up, a story, albeit with a nuanced perspective. In what is considered to be a worry for the security establishment in India, Indian drug smugglers and their contacts on either side of the international border with Myanmar used excavators to carve out a 10-kilometer road towards Dawn for a new drug route through Mizoram, since there is a conflict that's going on in Manipur. Dawn is the name of the nearest habitation from Lungkhaul, a village in central Mizoram's Serchip district situated near the border with Myanmar. Now, sleuths of the state's Excise and Narcotics Department discovered the track from Tiau River, which marks Mizoram's border with Myanmar. The new route is being marked by the drug mafia to avoid the ethnic conflict in Manipur. Meanwhile, shifting our focus here, as per reports, the Indian and the Chinese military ground commanders along the line of actual control have been holding interactions to rule out any untoward incidents as the harsh months of winter approach. Now, the talks come as both the forces brace for what will be the fourth winter since the start of a military standoff along the line of actual control, which began in the summer of 2020. As per reports, several agenda-based interactions have been taking place at multiple points along the LSE for the past 10 days. The talks are being headed by local commanders at the level of brigade and with the objective to sort out minor issues that may have cropped up and to prevent any incident during the coming winter months. Now, these meetings are among the various confidence-building measures which were discussed during the previous Corps Commander level talks between India and China. More such kind of meetings are likely to take place over the next few weeks, but importantly, the Indian Army has already started moving into its winter posture. Enhancement of infrastructure is also being carried out at the border areas. This as the Army continues to maintain adequate reserves in the sensitive areas along the line of actual control in order to be prepared to deal with any contingency that may happen. Well, next up, the latest details from the war front. It's day 38 of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being. There seems to be no end to the fighting. UNRWA schools and hospitals, they're not safe either. People are running from pillar to post, searching for safety. Those who've been asked to evacuate from the north part of the strip towards the south part of the strip, well, they are being hit with strikes as well. Day 38, this is the latest that we're tracking. 11,078 Palestinians have been killed. Nearly 1,200 Israelis have been killed. Mind you, the death toll has not been updated since Friday. Meanwhile, 4,506 children have been killed in Gaza. That accounts for one child's death every 10 minutes on average. 46 Israeli Defense Forces have been killed in the ground operation. 240 plus Israelis, civilians and soldiers alike, are being held in Gaza as hostage. 570 plus aid trucks have been let into Gaza so far, albeit that number seems to be very minuscule. Netanyahu has meanwhile pushed back against the international calls for a ceasefire. This even as Iran calls on Islamic nations to designate the Israeli Defense Force as a terrorist organization. Now, the United Nations says that at least 3 nurses were killed at the Al-Shifa hospital, even as the hospital was bombed. Now, there's a fuel monopoly that's taking place. The United States has struck 2 locations in eastern Syria. But take a look at what's happening back at home. The trade unions in India have told the central government to scrap the deal to send Indian workers to Israel. Now, leaders at the Arab League and the OIC joint summit hosted by Saudi Arabia, all of them called for an end to the war in Gaza, justifying Israel's actions against Palestinians as self-defense. Now, the summit, it condemned Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip and termed the actions of the Israeli army as war crimes, barbaric and inhuman massacres. At the beginning of the summit, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said that the kingdom, quote-unquote, holds the Israeli authorities responsible for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people.
We are witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe that demonstrates the failure of the Security Council and the international community to put an end to the flagrant Israeli violations of international laws and norms and international humanitarian law. It confirms the double standards and selectively in its application. What future do I speak of when Gaza is being destroyed? Every hour, tens of people die. What future do they want us to talk about? The only future that we can talk about, and this is the unifying position of the Arab and Islamic countries, is an immediate ceasefire.
President Ibrahim Raisi, who is on his first trip to Saudi Arabia since the 2 countries mended ties in March, called upon the Islamic countries to designate the Israeli army as a terrorist organization.
Undoubtedly, the US government is the commander and the main accomplice of the crime. Both the war machines of the Zionist regime and its fuel belong to the Americans. Cutting any sort of political or economic relations with the Zionist regime by the Islamic countries. In this regard, trade boycott against the Zionist regime, especially in the energy field, should be prioritized. Islamic governments should designate the army of the occupying and aggressor regime as a terrorist organization.
Now, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he renewed his call for an immediate ceasefire and said that Israel was taking revenge on Gazan babies, children and women.
We are faced with a barbarism unprecedented in history, where hospitals, places of worship, schools and refugee camps, ambulances are bombed and civilians are massacred. According to the UN, in Gaza and Ramallah, 12,000 Palestinians have been killed and 73% of them were women and children.
Well, on the final declaration of the summit, also called upon the United Nations Security Council to adopt a decisive and binding resolution to halt Israel's aggression. The declaration also called for an end to weapons sales to Israel and dismissed any kind of a future political resolution to the conflict that would keep Gaza separate from the West Bank. The summit, however, also brought out the differences which exist among the Arabic countries. 4 Arab nations rejected a proposal which called for prohibiting the use of American and other military bases located in Arab countries to supply Israel with weapons and ammunition and other material. The names of these 4 countries that rejected the proposal have not been disclosed. At the same time, several nations in the grouping also rejected responding to Israel's actions by disrupting oil supplies and by severing economic and diplomatic ties with Israel. Israel has till now rejected all calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the Israeli forces will continue their operation in Gaza with full force. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has said that it will help in evacuating babies who are trapped in Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. The announcement was made by Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari. Listen in.
We're speaking directly and regularly with the hospital staff. The staff of the Shifa hospital has requested that tomorrow we will help the babies in the pediatric department to get to a safer hospital. We will provide the assistance needed. There is no siege, I repeat, there is no siege on the Shifa hospital. The east side of the hospital is open on El Wade Street for the safe pass of Gazans who wish to leave the hospital.
And now this announcement from Israel comes after several international humanitarian organizations called upon the Israeli government to cease the unrelenting assault on Gaza's health system. Our next report tells you more.
Thousands of people seeking safety in southern Gaza fled the enclave's main hospital on Saturday as fighting continued in the area for the second day. This man says he lost his son in gunfire and that he had to keep moving, leaving his body at the site.
It's more of a war zone here. It's continuous bombardment for more than 24 hours.
Speaking to Reuters by phone, Palestinian senior plastic surgeon Dr. Ahmed al-Mokhalalati said most of the hospital staff and people sheltering at Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, had left, but 500 patients were still there. A Palestinian health ministry spokesman said Israeli shelling had killed a patient in intensive care, and fighting was limiting people's ability to move. Palestinian officials said 2 babies had died and dozens more were at risk after fuel ran out on Saturday. At a news conference, Chief Israeli military spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the military will help evacuate babies trapped there. In this video released by the Israeli army, defense official Colonel Moshe Tetro says there are clashes between Israel Defense Forces troops and Hamas operatives around the hospital, but the Israeli military denied endangering it. Israel said earlier that doctors, patients, and thousands of evacuees who have taken refuge at the hospitals in northern Gaza must leave so it can tackle Hamas gunmen who it says have placed command centers under and around them. Hamas denies using hospitals in this way. Meanwhile, Hamas said it had completely or partially destroyed more than 160 Israeli military targets in Gaza, including more than 25 vehicles in the past 48 hours. But an Israeli military spokesperson said Hamas had lost control of northern Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated in a press conference on Saturday his aim that Israel take security control over Gaza for an indefinite period, saying we won't stop until the mission is completed. Dr. Rick Brennan, the regional emergency director of the World Health Organization, says the situation is desperate.
50% of those hospitals are non-functioning right now. Those that are functioning are working well below their capacity because of a lack of fuel, a lack of medicines, a lack of water and necessary medical supplies. Doctors, nurses are completely exhausted and overwhelmed, and a number of the hospitals are under attack.
As the humanitarian situation worsened, Gaza's border authority announced that the Rafah land crossing into Egypt would reopen on Sunday for foreign passport holders after being closed on Friday.
Meanwhile, a child is being killed on average every 10 minutes in the Gaza Strip. This according to World Health Organization Director General Jeff Tedros, who also told the same to the United Nations Security Council on Friday. He said that half of Gaza's 36 hospitals and 2/3 of its primary healthcare centers were not functioning, and those that were operating were way beyond their capacities, describing the healthcare systems as being, quote-unquote, on its knees.
Tens of thousands of displaced people sheltering at hospitals, families crammed into overcrowded schools, desperate for food and water. More than 10,800 people have now been killed in Gaza, almost 70% of them women and children. On average, a child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. 1.5 million people have been displaced and are looking for shelter anywhere they can find it. But nowhere and no one is safe.
Meanwhile, 13 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli strike on a house in Khan Yunis, according to health officials in the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. Injured people and children were rushed to Nasser Hospital in ambulances and private vehicles. People were seen crowding into hospitals as doctors examined the wounded covered in dust and blood. Now, Israeli forces fought Hamas terrorists and inched their way closer to the two big hospitals in northern Gaza as the plight of civilians in the besieged Palestinian enclave worsens. Many continue to flee the embattled north to the south.
Smoke rises behind Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. In the courtyard and corridors are thousands of displaced people. At the gates, body bags. Israeli forces fought Hamas militants among ruined buildings in the north of the Gaza Strip on Thursday, inching their way closer to Al-Shifa and another main hospital in Gaza City. In the emergency room, this man says he and others tried to head south, but when they reached the road, a tank fired at them. Others fled along a frontline route. The White House said on Thursday Israel has agreed to pause operations in northern Gaza for 4 hours a day from Thursday, the first sign of respite in Gaza's war, allowing people to flee along two humanitarian corridors. Some of those escaping on Thursday said they feared another Nakba, the catastrophe of their mass dispossession after Israel was founded in 1948.
They are driving people to schools and scaring them so they would leave. What we see today is a plan for a second exodus.
What do things look like behind us? Death and destruction. Death and destruction.
US President Joe Biden says he's seeking a longer halt of 3 days to help secure the release of hostages held by Hamas.
We're hopeful. Things are moving along.
Israel unleashed its assault on Gaza in response to a cross-border raid by Hamas gunmen, who killed 1,400 people, mostly civilians, as well as kidnapping about 240. But the plight of Palestinians trapped in the besieged enclave has stoked global calls for a ceasefire, which is rejected by Israel and its main ally, the United States. Palestinian officials said more than 10,800 Gaza residents had been killed as of Thursday, about 40% of them children. At a humanitarian conference in Paris on Thursday, officials from about 80 countries and organisations were trying to coordinate a response. Jan Egeland heads the Norwegian Refugee Council.
We cannot wait a minute more for a humanitarian ceasefire across Gaza for all of the civilian population there. And we cannot wait a minute more for a lifting of the siege, which is collective punishment of 1 million children.
And now, among thousands of Palestinians fleeing Gaza's north, seeking safety in the south, is a mother and her children who fled to Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis after the Al-Shifa Hospital in the north of the Strip was bombed.
We thought the hospital was a safe place, but it wasn't. If we had stayed another 5 minutes, we would have been killed. They started to bomb us and we ran away from Al-Shifa. My son got injured, so I left him there in the hospital to get treatment. I just couldn't take him with me. I was tired and afraid. I went to my nephew and told him to stay with my son, and then we fled. I came here to Nasser Hospital Complex for protection. And look, I am sitting on the side of the road. There is no space for me. My children and I are sitting on the ground, and we sleep on the street. I slept yesterday here on the street. I didn't know where to go. We walked 4 hours until our legs hurt and our hands hurt because of the belongings that we were carrying. We were carrying our children and our bags.
And similarly, a Gazan residing in a school run by the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the UNRWA, the UNRWA, in Beit Lahia, said he was searching for any safe place to save himself and his family. Standing in front of a crater from a fresh Israeli airstrike, the man who was displaced and currently staying in the school with 18 of his family members said even UNRWA schools are unsafe. Palestinian officials, according to their latest data, which was on Friday, said that 11,078 Gazan residents had been killed in air and artillery strikes, around 40% of them being children. Because heavy fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas has trapped thousands of people in Gaza's hospitals and schools alike, with medics and aid workers now warning that patients will die in the crippled facilities unless there is a pause in the battle. Now, children were seen playing in the crater of an overnight strike that hit the courtyard of an UNRWA school in Beit Lahia in northern Gaza Strip. But with no circus or fair inside the Al-Shifa hospital or actually anywhere across the Gaza Strip, Ala Miqdad gathered displaced children outside the Al-Shifa hospital and put on a clown show. After the deadly airstrike on the hospital, Miqdad joined thousands of other Palestinians fleeing Gaza's north as they sought safety in the south. Miqdad walked more than 6 kilometers from Al-Shifa hospital towards Rafah with his pregnant wife, hoping his baby will be delivered safely. Meanwhile, bringing you stories from the other side of the divide, take a look at what's happening in Israel. Around 50 protesters demonstrated in Tel Aviv this past weekend, calling for a ceasefire as Israeli forces' assault on the Gaza Strip rages on. They said they were protesting the indiscriminate killing of civilians that have been seen in the past weeks by Hamas and the IDF alike across the Gaza Strip. There were open calls for a ceasefire and release of the hostages. Placards that you can see on your screens read, "Ceasefire now and no winners in any war."
Especially children, no matter if they're Israeli. We are here to protest against the indiscriminate killing of civilians that we are seeing in the past weeks by Hamas and by the F in the Gaza Strip. We are calling for a ceasefire now and release of the hostages and going towards a solution to this never-ending bloodshed and continued killing. For Palestinians, we want everyone that live inside the border and outside of it, whether it's within Israel, the Gaza Strip, or the West Bank to live in peace and equality.
Now, in terms of evacuation, take a look at this. Dual national Palestinians, and mind you, these are dual national Palestinians. All of them are waiting at the Rafah border crossing, hoping to evacuate to Egypt. The intense fighting between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip has accelerated an exodus of people toward Gaza's south. Thousands remain trapped in Gaza's hospitals as Israel's air and ground campaign to destroy Hamas brings the fight to key medical installations. Meanwhile, dual national Palestinians gathering up at the Rafah border, hoping to evacuate to Egypt. While taking a look at some other top international developments as well. Japan's self-defense forces, the SDF, they held mock tsunami evacuations on Yonaguni Island near Taiwan. These are drills that a local official said could also help residents respond to any future Chinese attack on their neighbor. A Japan Force statement said that the exercise was about natural disaster preparedness, but it also gives people something to think about that may come in useful later in a Taiwanese emergency. Meanwhile, shifting our focus to the United States, where migrants continued to cross into the United States from Mexico. This through the open edge of the border wall in Jacumba Hot Springs, California. Now, for months now, a makeshift camp has seen migrants pass by in the eastern San Diego desert, where they wait to be processed by Border Patrol officials. Overwhelmed by record numbers of asylum seekers from around the world, the United States' border officials have released thousands of migrants on streets in the San Diego area in October, including about 1,400 in the beach town of Oceanside. United States border officers picked up more than 204,000 migrants in the San Diego sector in the 11 months running up to August, which is up by 27% from the same period of the previous year. Moving on, thousands of members of the supporters of Chile's LGBTQ community joined the 16th Equality March in Santiago to confront what they brand as a political gridlock on the LGBTQ and anti-discrimination issues. Moving on, surgeons in New York have performed the first ever whole eye transplant on a human, an accomplishment being hailed as a breakthrough even though the patient has not regained sight in the eye as of yet.
Feel anything?
Aaron James is the recipient of the first ever whole eye transplant in a human. Though he hasn't regained sight in it yet, it's an accomplishment that's being hailed as a major medical breakthrough.
The mere fact that we transplanted an eye is a huge step forward, something that within centuries has been thought about but's never been performed.
Until now, doctors have only been able to transplant the cornea, the clear front layer of the eye. James, who survived a work-related high-voltage electrical accident, needed a partial face transplant. Initially, doctors were just planning to include the eyeball as part of the face transplant for cosmetic reasons. The surgery took 21 hours.
You know, they told me, they said, honestly, we never expected it to make it to the transplant, you know. I mean, they never expected it to work at all. And they told me that from the get-go. But But just the fact that it's alive, blood flowing through it, I mean, that's the first step, and that's what I told them. I said, even if I can't see, which I didn't have an eye there to begin with, after the accident, maybe at least, y'all can learn something to help the next person.
In the 6 months since the surgery, doctors say the grafted eye has shown important signs of health, including well-functioning blood vessels and a promising-looking retina. Lead surgeon Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez says transplantation of a viable eye opens many new possibilities.
If the possibility of some form of vision restoration occurred, it would be wonderful. But there were significant concerns. The goal was first to perform the technical operation, ideally have it be vascularized, and then whatever happens after that, we'd have to determine with future studies.
Other research teams are developing ways to connect nerve networks in the brain to sightless eyes through the insertion of electrodes, for example, to allow vision, meaning James might still regain sight in his transplanted eye.
And I don't think anyone can claim that he will see, but by the same token, they can claim that he will not see. If at this point, I think we're pretty happy with the result that we were able to achieve with a very technically demanding operation.
I mean, that's how you got to start it. You got to start it somewhere. So hopefully this opens up a new path.
Left, right.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping face-to-face for the first time in a year on this coming Wednesday in a high-stakes diplomacy meet aimed at curbing tensions between the world's two superpowers.
For the first time in a year, U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet face-to-face in California for a high-stakes discussion aimed at curbing tensions between the world's two superpowers. The White House confirmed the meeting on Friday, and senior administration officials said the two leaders were expected to discuss the Israel-Hamas war and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as several other topics including North Korea, Taiwan, fentanyl, and artificial intelligence.
I think this is a very important moment that might be a turning point in U.S.-China relations, which have continued to deteriorate for many years.
Vinny Agarwal is a professor of political science at UC Berkeley.
I think having the two presidents meet is a very good idea because there's been a lot of tension in U.S.-China relations over semiconductors, over technology transfer and the like. And so I think the opportunity to have a conversation with President Xi and having President talk to President Biden will be very useful because I think the Chinese are now beginning to see that it's useful to have good relations with other countries, including Korea, Australia, and the like, and they're actually making an effort now to reach out to other countries.
Tensions have flared between the two countries since their last meeting a year ago. In February, Biden ordered the shooting down of a suspected Chinese spy balloon that transited U.S. skies. Biden is also expected to raise Chinese influence operations in foreign elections and the status of U.S. citizens Washington believes are wrongly detained in China. The closely watched interaction, which is set for Wednesday on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in the San Francisco Bay Area, could last hours and involve teams of officials from Beijing and Washington.
Well, now moving on, take a look at this. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau shot a fresh salvo against India. He said that the world will become more dangerous for everyone if bigger countries can violate international law without consequences. Now, ties between New Delhi and Ottawa have been hit since Trudeau accused India agents of involvement in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Nijjar was shot dead outside a Gurdwara in Canada's British Columbia back in June. Nijjar was chief of the banned Khalistan Tiger Force. He was one of India's most wanted terrorists. India hit out at Canada, calling the allegations absurd and motivated. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister was addressing the media at the launch of a countrywide smart energy grid when he responded on a question on the matter. Coming up next, a big segment on global climate stories. First up to Iceland, where the Icelandic authorities have completed the evacuation of 3,000 residents of a town in the southwestern part of the country over concerns of a volcanic eruption. This after a series of earthquakes and evidence of magma spreading underground. Icelandic authorities said on Saturday that they were preparing for a volcanic eruption in the southwest of the island in the coming days after a series of earthquakes and evidence of magma spreading rapidly. The Icelandic Met Office said that there was a considerable risk of an eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula because of the size of the underground magma intrusion and the rate at which it is moving, which was several times greater than what was previously measured in the same area. Now, Iceland's Civil Protection Agency overnight ordered a complete evacuation of Grindavik, a nearby fishing town, although it emphasized this was not an emergency evacuation. Now, the Reykjanes region has in recent years seen several eruptions in unpopulated areas, but the current outbreak is believed to pose an immediate risk to the town, as per authorities. Increased seismic activity has prompted the closure of the Blue Lagoon geothermal spa, one of the country's main tourist attractions.
Hours, the magma is now on a very shallow depth. So we're expecting an eruption within a couple of hours, shortest, but at least within a couple of days. The location of it is somewhere from the town of Grindavik to the northeast. We have a fissure that's about 15 kilometers long, and anywhere on that fissure we can see that an eruption could happen. Because the end of the dike, the fissure that we're looking at, it goes into the sea. So if it will start in the sea, we would have at least in the beginning an explosive period in the eruption. But that's the most unlikely scenario, as the scientist says. But we are prepared for that also. At this time, we have evacuated everyone that lives in the area, so there is no people in danger at the moment. So there are two things that we're looking at. This the town of Grindavik with everything in it. It's a town of 3,700 people. But very close to the town we have a critical infrastructure. We have a power plant and we have the freshwater reservoir, and the hot water is also coming from this area. So there's a lot of critical infrastructure very close by. It can be because our main focus is the life and health of people, and now we think we have done everything we can because nobody should be there. So that's our first priority. But we are really concerned about all the houses and the infrastructure in there.
What we are seeing now really is an unprecedented event. We are really talking about velocities for this process and volumes or inflow rates that are much higher than what we have been seeing in the peninsula so far. Why this process is faster? That's because the more magma apparently is available. The surrounding has changed a lot. The crust has been fractured so much over the past 3 years, and that's in a way might be helping magmatic fluids in finding faster their path.
Shifting our focus here, the exposed cracked floors of parts of Lake Titicaca, South America's largest freshwater basin, nestled amid the Andes Mountains, are an alarming sight for local farmers and scientists. Well, why? Here's a report. Take a look.
This dry patch of land used to be parts of Lake Titicaca. Now, record low water levels amid a long spell of drought are threatening the region's ecosystem. It's an alarming sight for local farmers like Manuel Flores.
I am 50 years old. Never before has Lake Titicaca dried up like it is now.
Nestled amid the Andes Mountains, Lake Titicaca is South America's largest body of freshwater and is also the highest navigable lake in the world. It's an important ecosystem for wildlife and a water source for millions of people in the region. But its water levels are now reaching record lows.
This affects us because there is no more food for our livestock and we cannot travel by boat. Now we have to walk, and our crops no longer exist because it hasn't rained since last year. So the water has decreased.
The situation is worsened by El Niño weather phenomenon. That means less rain in the area, compounding a long dry spell and rare high temperatures. Experts say many of the factors contributing to the shrinking of Lake Titicaca could be linked to climate change. Xavier Lazaro is an aquatic system specialist with the French Research Institute for Development.
95% of the water loss from the lake is due to evaporation, which shows that this is totally or almost totally caused by climate change.
Farmers and experts say the drought is now approaching critical levels for the region's agriculture. If it does not rain by early December, there will be no planting of potatoes, one of the food staples for Bolivia's rural communities and cities. Lake Titicaca's decline comes with global temperatures hitting record highs, which has impacted rivers, lakes and glaciers from the United States to Asia.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Top Stories. Lots more continues right on the other side. Keep watching News9 Live.
Hamas attacks Israel. Israel Defense Forces strike back at Hamas. As the war unfolds, watch the comprehensive coverage of the Israel war only on News9 Plus. To watch the full story, download the app now.